Racist cop, slap the wrong judge. 4 minutes later, their empire begins to crumble. You can witness thousands of court trials, hear countless oaths of honor echo between the imposing walls of authority. But there will be one day, just one, when everything you believed about justice, law, and power collapses with a single slap. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. That morning, the Charleston courthouse opened as usual. The worn stone steps leading into the main hall still carried the dampness of the southern air, and sunlight flickered faintly through stained glass windows. Everything seemed peaceful, as if history had fallen asleep upon marble floors and classical columns. But then he walked in. Beckham Atkinson, police sergeant, 20 years on the force, a record once called clean. Though a single scratch beneath the surface revealed the rotting stench hidden behind conveniently faded words. Beckham had been subject to at least 11 formal complaints, including unjustified violence, racial slurs, and one filed by a 14-year-old black student, who later, without explanation, withdrew it. Yet he was still honored as Officer of the Year in 2018. Because Charleston, like so many other places, knows how to protect the man who wears the badge, so long as he bows at the right time and smiles in the right places. That morning, Beckham was accompanied by a scrawny boy, no older than 17. His wrists bore the marks of tight cuffs. His shirt was torn in the back, his eyes wide open as if trying to absorb the unfamiliar place around him. He'd been accused of graffiti, scribbling the word freedom on a wall of the old train station. A minor offense, if you're white. A death sentence, if you're not. And then, from the other end of the room, she walked in. No judge's robe, no entourage, just a black woman, hair neatly tied up, wearing a dark suit, holding a stack of case files. No one bowed. Beckham didn't even glance her way. He assumed she was a clerk, or worse, the boy's mother. "Are we going to get started or what?" he barked with the familiar tone of a man used to being obeyed. She remained silent, eyes fixed on the case file. A few young journalists had just arrived, typing out quick notes, unaware they were about to witness an earthquake. He stepped closer. "I'm talking to you," he repeated. And then, the slap landed. No warning. A wide hand, filled with contempt, struck her left cheek with a loud smack that echoed across the courtroom, still and silent as a crypt. You may not believe it, but in that exact moment, the air stopped moving. A lawyer dropped his pen. A woman gasped, whispering, "Oh my God!" And the woman who had just taken the slap didn't react the way anyone expected. She didn't scream. She didn't raise her hand to her cheek. She didn't flinch. Jennifer Aniston, 62 years old, the first black woman in Charleston's history to be appointed to the highest seat of the local Supreme Court, simply lifted her head. Her deep brown eyes stared straight at Beckham Atkinson, unblinking, unwavering, the gaze of someone who had seen too many games of power to be afraid anymore. Then she stepped up to the bench. Slow, steady steps. When her hand touched the judge's gavel and tapped it lightly on the wood, the sound wasn't loud, but it sliced through the air like a blade. Beckham stepped back. The teenage boy sat up straight, and everyone in the room, clerks, lawyers, journalists, finally realized they had just witnessed a white cop slap Judge Jennifer Aniston, the most powerful figure in that courtroom. But worse for him, he had slapped the wrong person. And that slap was about to rip apart the very system he once believed would protect him forever. You can erase data from a computer. You can tear up a complaint form. You can even make a lawsuit disappear from the system with one well-timed phone call. But there is one thing you cannot erase: the memory of someone who once read the truth. When the sound of the gavel struck the bench, Beckham Atkinson's slap was no longer a personal matter. It became a legal event, an unlawful act recorded not only by 2 discreet ceiling security cameras, but also by 4 mobile phones pulled out at just the right moment, by lawyers, interns, and 1 rookie reporter. Irrefutable evidence, the kind Atkinson had spent the last 2 decades dodging, as if some invisible hand had been wiping his footprints off every stain. You wouldn't know this by looking at his record. According to that, Beckham Atkinson had received 6 commendations for outstanding service, had once been an honorary guest at the Charleston Police Academy graduation ceremony, and had most recently been awarded a Medal of Honor for stopping an armed robbery, which Jennifer later found out involved a 13-year-old boy holding a toy gun scribbled on with marker. No one wanted to mess with Atkinson. He was the son of the former police captain of North King District, nephew of a retired state senator, and brother-in-law of the head of internal affairs before he retired last year. A hidden web of influence, the kind of people whose name, if spelled wrong in a report, could end your entire career. But Jennifer didn't forget. She had been a public defender before becoming a prosecutor, and more than 30 years in the field made her well acquainted with the names that kept resurfacing. Beckham was one of them. When she worked as a prosecutor in 2009, 3 cases bearing his name were dismissed for lack of witnesses, despite hospital records, crime scene photos, and eyewitness reports all being present. Another time, in 2015, she happened to read a complaint from a black nurse named Marcia O'Donnell, who accused Atkinson of choking her son during an arrest just because the boy was too loud while waiting for her during her night shift at the hospital. The case disappeared from the system within 48 hours. Jennifer had quietly saved a scanned copy of that complaint, as she always did with anything no one else dared to keep. When she asked, "Did you just lay hands on me inside this courtroom, Sergeant Atkinson?" her voice didn't need to be loud, but everyone heard it. And Beckham, the man who had once screamed in the faces of countless innocent people, suddenly shrank, in his gaze, in his posture, in his very self. "You weren't wearing a judge's robe. I thought you were," he stammered. "I didn't ask what you thought I was. I asked if you assaulted me." She cut him off, like a blade peeling back layers of lies. A court clerk began noting everything into the record. A young attorney began live streaming. A courtroom staff member quickly confirmed, "The cameras are on. Clear footage is available, Your Honor." Beckham Atkinson, who had entered that room with puffed chest and echoing footsteps, now stood silent under the cold glare of the cameras. For the first time in his 20-year career, he couldn't just make a call to make this go away. Because this time, he hadn't just struck a woman, he struck the face of justice itself. And that woman, Jennifer Aniston, hadn't come to forgive. She came to end a rotten chapter Charleston had spent far too long pretending not to see. And in the calm steadiness of her eyes at that moment, you could see it clearly. Today wasn't just about judging one officer. It was the day an entire system began to face the light. You've probably heard people say that justice is blind. But within the aged stone walls of Charleston's courthouse, justice wasn't blind. It had simply been forced to look away. After the slap and Jennifer Aniston's resolute declaration, the silence that had blanketed the courtroom began to crack. And then, like a small fracture in a hydroelectric dam, with just the right leak in the right place, the entire system began to tremble. You see, Jennifer wasn't just a judge. She had served nearly a decade as chief prosecutor before taking the bench. In a locked drawer in her office, she kept an internal archive of cases dismissed due to lack of evidence. Some shut down in less than 48 hours. They all had one common thread. Sergeant Beckham Atkinson's name appeared somewhere in the file. Sometimes as the arresting officer, sometimes as a witness, occasionally as the author of the initial report. That very afternoon, following the incident, Jennifer called a private meeting with 2 investigators from the State Department of Internal Affairs, Rosalind Keene, a black woman known for her cold resolve and refusal to compromise, and Felix Reyes, a forensic data analyst who had exposed 3 cases of record tampering in 2022. They retrieved every piece of footage, trial transcript, clerk notes, and officer reports available from that courtroom session. Within 48 hours, a total of 19 suspicious cases landed on Jennifer's desk. Among them, 11 wrongful arrests, with victims primarily black youths between the ages of 15 and 21. 5 complaints of excessive force, including one involving traumatic brain injury that had been rewritten in the report as accidental fall. 3 accusations of assault against minors, one of which involved a 16-year-old student shoved down the steps at the Central Bus Terminal for refusing to open his backpack. But what made Jennifer clench her fists wasn't the number. It was where those cases had disappeared. They all shared a familiar bottleneck. Assistant District Attorney Carson Ramsey, once described as the ideal partner for the police department in handling city crime. The next day, Ramsey was nowhere to be found in court. An email requesting medical leave was sent by his assistant. When Internal Affairs came looking, his office had been emptied down to the last draft folder. But then, as if fate intervened, an IT technician at the police department, while scanning the servers to verify footage from the day of the slap, stumbled upon an overlooked audio file buried in an old archive. It was a 3-minute recording of a locker room conversation between 3 officers. In it, Beckham Atkinson's voice rang out clearly. "That Jennifer woman, she steps out of line. She's done. All it takes is one call, and she'll never sit on that bench again." An unidentified voice chuckled. "She doesn't know who she's messing with," and Beckham replied, "Messing? I make the rules around here." When the tape was played in a secure room inside the judge's chambers, Jennifer said nothing. She sat upright, eyes fixed on the screen. Her hands were tightly clasped together, but her expression showed no trembling, no outrage, no surprise. Because you see, she had suspected this all along, and now she had proof. This was no longer the story of a rogue cop abusing power. This was a network, sustained by calculated silence, wrapped in the illusion of social order, and shielded by people positioned in just the right places at just the right time. And for the first time, that wall had begun to crack. Not because someone broke it down, but because a slap, seemingly meaningless, had revealed the fracture from within. You can expose a person. You can bring light into corridors that have only ever known darkness. But when you begin to touch a system, especially one that has survived for decades by burying the truth, darkness doesn't retreat. It strikes back. Just hours after the closed-door meeting with the Internal Affairs team concluded, Jennifer Aniston received an anonymous email. The subject line was brief. "Are you clean?" The message contained a link to a fabricated news site, featuring a headline. Judge Jennifer Aniston plagiarized her thesis back in 2009. No author, no source, no verification. Yet the article was shared over 8,000 times within 4 hours on a well-known far-right forum. And it didn't stop there. A second post surfaced that same day. An old college photo of Jennifer, her fist raised during a 2015 protest demanding justice for Freddie Gray, was edited against a riot backdrop, overlaid with bold red text, "Radical judge, can she be fair?" The image went viral across social media groups at breakneck speed. A wave of personal attacks followed, mostly from anonymous accounts. Someone like her shouldn't be a judge. Give our courts back to patriots. The next morning, things went beyond the media. Jennifer's 11-year-old nephew Malik was biking to school when a stranger handed him a thick envelope. Inside was a photo of him, taken from behind as he biked alone, scrawled in smudged red ink on the back. "Your grandma should know her place." You can imagine how the heart of even the toughest woman might sink at the sight of a threat aimed directly at her blood. But Jennifer didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't go to the local police because she knew exactly who controlled that system. Instead, she quietly entered her office, locked the door, and called the Federal Bureau of Investigation directly. "This is no longer about politics," she told Agent Rosalind Keene. "This is organized crime." That same night, Malik was withdrawn from school. He was taken to a relative's home in the suburbs under the protection of an anonymous federal agent. Even his phone was replaced with a secure device, disconnected from all social media. Jennifer didn't explain the full reason to him. She simply held him tight and said, "You did nothing wrong. Neither did I. But some people hate the truth so much, they'll do anything to stop it from being spoken." At the same time, Jennifer discovered her office had been bugged. A federal agent scanning the premises found 2 miniature surveillance devices, one under the meeting table, the other behind the bookshelf. Both were high-grade equipment typically used in government espionage operations. Within 3 days, she became the center of a full-scale discrediting campaign. Anonymous texts flooded her phone. "Careful. Your career won't protect your blood. Courts may shift, but we don't forget." What Jennifer didn't yet know was that this very attack had exposed a fatal error by the other side. A technician at Charleston's local news station, while inspecting the metadata of one of the viral images, discovered it had last been edited on the internal server of the State Department of Justice. Undeniably proof that someone within the system was manipulating the media, spreading fabricated stories, not to protect reputation, but to preserve power. You see, the system didn't react because it was strong. It reacted because it was panicking. And in that panic, Jennifer understood one thing. They didn't just want to scare her. They wanted to silence her, return her to the place where people like her had been forced to exist for generations. But they miscalculated. Because she hadn't come to ask permission to speak. She came to dismantle the steel muzzle that had been welded over justice for far too long. Have you ever seen camera lights pointed at a woman? Not to interview her, not to praise her, but to scrutinize, to corner her, to see if she would tremble or fight back. But that morning, on the steps of the Charleston courthouse, when Jennifer Aniston stepped out with steady strides and a face untouched by fear, every lens became a witness, not of collapse, but of rising. She wasn't wearing a judge's robe. She didn't need a symbol, just a deep blue suit, neatly tailored, with the collar bearing a small pin from the Howard Law School where she once studied. Behind her stood Carter Lang, her longtime aide with eyes sharp as stone. At her sides were agents Rosalind Keene and Felix Ray, representing what Charleston had previously only known through slogans, "Federal Justice." "We're not here because of a slap," Jennifer began, her voice clear, each word honed like steel. "But because that slap revealed a system that has survived too long on fear, on convenient silence, and untouchable privilege. Below, hundreds had gathered. Citizens held signs. Justice for the silenced, clean the bench, and protect the truth, not the uniform." In the crowd, you could see black mothers clutching their children, war veterans once shunned after service, and young students who, for the first time, felt someone in the system truly stood for them. Jennifer raised a file folder in her hand. Black cover, red stamped, confidential. "In this file," she said, "is a list of 12 individuals. Not strangers, not faceless ghosts. These are people who signed off on wrongful prosecutions. People who looked away from edited videos, distorted testimonies. Among them are 7 police officers, from sergeants to captains. 2 prosecutors, who once worked side by side with my office. 1 legal advisor, 1 city council member, and, most painful of all, a judge. She didn't read their names, not out of fear, but because she still believed in the process. "I don't need to convict them in public," she said, "because I have already submitted all the information to the U.S. Department of Justice, the Office of the Inspector General, and the South Carolina State Ethics Committee." The space fell silent. Even the cameramen stopped filming. Because you could say anything you wanted about Jennifer Aniston. But one thing was undeniable. She never stepped outside the law, but she forced the law to look itself in the mirror. "Someone asked me," she continued, "why not stay on the bench and fight from within?" She lifted her head, eyes gleaming like blades. "Because light doesn't come from the bench. It comes from action. I didn't step down out of fear. I stepped down because I wanted that light to shine on every corner that's been kept in the dark." Just hours after Jennifer Aniston's explosive press conference, an unmarked black sedan was spotted, leaving downtown Charleston, heading toward the Ravenel Bridge. Inside was Beckham, dark circles under his eyes, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He no longer wore a pressed uniform, had no gun, and no police radio. Just a man on the run. But what he didn't know, he had been under surveillance for 3 days. At 3:42 p.m. in basement level 3 of the municipal garage parking structure, 4 U.S. Marshals emerged from concealed positions. Each was equipped with soft body armor, FNX .45 sidearms, and chest-mounted cameras. They approached the now stationary vehicle. A firm voice rang out. "Beckham Atkinson, drop your weapon. Step out of the vehicle with your hands raised." No protest. No profanity. Not even the defiant stare he was once known for. Beckham stepped out, quietly, hair disheveled. Sweat was soaking the collar of his shirt. And when asked to kneel, he didn't hesitate. His head bowed low, shoulders slumped like a shadow drained of pride. As the cuffs snapped around his wrists, he whispered one sentence. "Can I speak to someone?" But this time, no one was listening. The information reached the U.S. Department of Justice at 3:51. Within 12 minutes, Jennifer Aniston received a text from Agent Reyes. "He's in custody. No resistance. We're transporting." She didn't smile, didn't cheer. She simply sat up straight, eyes on the data board before her, and said, "I want every single case he's been involved in frozen immediately. Review every report, every testimony, every second of body cam footage." In the Charleston court system, Beckham had his name on 127 arrests over 15 years. Of those, 32 showed signs of excessive force. 19 lacked accompanying video, despite policy requirements. 8 involved conflicting statements between defendants and police, but the police always prevailed. 4 were resolved via plea bargain suggestions, even though the defendants initially refused to sign. In an emergency meeting at federal headquarters, Jennifer proposed initiating the process to seal all records connected to Beckham Atkinson, while convening a review board to re-examine all verdicts where he was the arresting officer or primary witness. Simultaneously, in another office, the legal team reopened a case involving Julius Spence, a black teenager arrested by Beckham in 2019 for disturbing the peace. After being brought to the station, Julius was hospitalized with a brain injury and died 3 days later. At the time, the incident was ruled as a fall in custody. No charges were ever filed. Now, with new evidence from phones, threat letters, and recovered hidden data, Beckham wasn't just being prosecuted for slapping a judge. He faced 5 federal charges, including obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, evidence tampering, abuse of power, and conspiracy to conceal misconduct. 3 additional criminal indictments were filed by the state of South Carolina. And most notably, he was the first confirmed link in an internal protection network within the Charleston police force, tied to at least 2 prosecutors and 1 retired judge. And you know what's more terrifying than an indictment? The fact that Beckham knew, this time, no one was coming to save him. Not the lawyers from the Police Defense League, not the brothers-in-arms from the force, not the familiar legal advisor at City Hall. He had become a burden, a burned card, a man the system had discarded, the very system he once believed would protect him forever. And with each step he took down the federal courthouse hallway, the steel cuffs didn't just restrain his hands. They beat out a warning in every clang, for those still standing, still complicit, still wondering, am I the next one? When the internal affairs agents placed the expanded report on Jennifer Aniston's desk, she expected familiar names. But not this one. Not Benjamin Halcraftoft. He had been the embodiment of refined justice in Charleston for over 4 decades. Former federal district judge, twice elected head of the state judicial council, once nominated to the Supreme Court of Appeals. But to Jennifer, he was more than that. He was the man who wrote her recommendation to Columbia Law. The one who gave her a research assistant position when she was just a wide-eyed second-year student. The one who held her hand as she took her oath, becoming the first black female judge in the city. She remembered his eyes that day, bright, proud. And now, those same eyes returned in a file folder stamped in red. Case closed by directive. No prosecution. His name appeared 3 times, each tied to cases involving Beckham Atkinson's misconduct, including one with clear street camera footage, but dismissed as inadmissible evidence. Jennifer kept reading, her hand steady, but her heart clenched. Not from shock, from pain, because she had believed. Believed there was at least one person in that world of power who genuinely wanted her to rise, not as a shield to cover the rot behind. That night, close to 1 a.m., the desk phone in her office rang, a hidden number. A voice came through. Low, slow, familiar. "Jennifer," he said. "I know." She didn't answer. "You're going too far. Do you think that if you drag everyone down, you'll be celebrated?" Number: "You're destabilizing everything we built together." "No," she replied, her voice calm as a still lake. "I'm bringing light to where it was blocked." He sighed. "If you continue, everything we built will fall apart. You'll lose your seat. No counsel will back you. No one will protect you when things get worse. What we built wasn't justice if it needed lies to stand," she said, firmer now. "I'm not destroying. I'm purifying." Silence lasted nearly a full minute. Then his voice softened, but turned colder. "If you go on, it won't just be your career erased. It will be history rewritten, without your name in it." "Then," she whispered, "let it be rewritten with the truth." The call ended in a chilling quiet. The very next morning, the DOJ office received an official request from Jennifer Aniston to re-examine all cases presided over by Judge Halcraftoft that involved Beckham Atkinson and his affiliates. Attached were 27 pages of Jennifer's notes, including case files, cross-connections, contradictory testimonies, and financial transfers from the Charleston Police Fund into Halcraftoft's Scholarship Foundation account, just weeks before he ruled to dismiss prosecution in one of the cases. News of the abuse of power network in Charleston exploded like a match struck in a room full of gasoline. National media camped outside City Hall. Local news stations gave hourly updates, and the hashtag number Charleston awakens spread across social media, exceeding 2 million shares in just 48 hours. And then, the people began to gather. Not with rage, but with the long-standing pain that had never been named. In front of the courthouse steps, hundreds stood. Each carried a story, a memory, a loss. A mother in black clutched a photo of her 19-year-old son, who died during an attempted arrest despite being unarmed. An elderly man held a complaint letter from 1997, never been answered. A little girl gripped her sister's hand, her eyes too young to fully grasp, yet somehow, knowing they stood before something important. They raised signs, not with angry slogans, but with urgent pleas. Justice doesn't choose skin color. I am one of them. The silenced voice now needs to be returned. And then, from within the crowd, the grand doors of the courthouse opened. Not to pronounce judgment, not to deliver a verdict, but to listen. Jennifer Aniston stepped out, this time without the judge's robe, without the symbols of power, just herself, a woman in a dark suit, her eyes shining not with authority, but with resolve. She stood before hundreds of eyes, hundreds of compressed heartbeats, and said, "Today, I do not speak as a judge. I speak as a citizen, as someone who once believed in this system, as someone who has been hurt by that very system, and as someone standing here to declare we are no longer alone." Her voice wasn't loud, but steady. She didn't read a speech. She spoke from the heart. The slap didn't hurt me. What hurts is knowing it may have happened hundreds of times to people with no cameras, no titles, no chance to be heard. People erased from the record as if they never existed. A sob echoed from the back. Someone bowed their head in tears. Jennifer extended her hand forward, as if trying to reach everyone at once. We've let fear take the stage for too long. Now it's time. Justice isn't just words in a book. It's an action. It's transparency. It's voice. Someone shouted, "You're not alone!" Applause roared like the drumbeat of a march, not into war, but into truth. Jennifer looked up toward the ivory columns, the very steps she had climbed for years, where she once sat in judgment, believing she was part of something good. But now she knew. The good didn't come on its own. It had to be built. It had to be reclaimed. "Don't build a statue of me," she said, her eyes fixed on a little girl sitting atop her father's shoulders. "Make me the beginning, so the next woman who takes that seat won't have to fight like I did, just to be heard." It was Monday morning at the Charleston federal courthouse, where the white stone walls no longer merely served as the backdrop of the law. They stood as witnesses to a moment that history would remember by name, Charleston's day of reckoning. Media swarmed from the entrance gate to the top floors. 4 national television networks broadcast live. More than 1,500 people gathered outside the central plaza, braving the icy February drizzle. From past victims of the system, lawyers, and law students, to human rights activists, everyone understood that what was unfolding was not merely a criminal trial. This was a trial for an entire culture of unchecked power. Beckham Atkinson entered the courtroom in gray prison attire. No badge, no gun holster. His face bore not rage, but a quiet confusion, as if he still couldn't comprehend how the world had so completely turned against him. Beside him were 2 court-appointed defense attorneys, after his former legal counsel's firm officially declined representation due to ethical conflict. He was indicted on 5 federal charges: assault and bodily harm against a federal officer, namely Jennifer, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, abuse of power in law enforcement, and conspiracy to cover up interagency misconduct. Additionally, 3 state-level criminal charges were under further investigation, related to camera data deletions and wrongful prosecutions in cases spanning from 2015 to 2021. Meanwhile, ADA Carson Ramsey, who had manipulated numerous cases, formally resigned after leaked recordings and internal emails revealed he had actively altered files to support Beckham. Not long after, Judge Hal Kraftoft, a former symbol of judicial integrity, was suspended from office, pending a federal investigation on charges of prosecutorial bias and non-transparent financial dealings with the city police fund. Think it all peaked there? It didn't. 140 case files involving Beckham, whether as arresting officer, key witness, or indirect participant, were sealed for review. Among them, 64 cases had no body cam footage, and 39 involved victims who never received proper legal representation. On the witness stand, when asked why she started it all, Jennifer, for the first time wearing her judge's robe again, answered with a line that came without fanfare, yet drained the air from the courtroom. "Because if I don't stand, those who come after me will always be pushed down." There was a pause. Not because people didn't know how to respond, but because everyone felt like she had just spoken for them. That injustice wasn't just a statistic in a report. It was a daily lived experience, where the law didn't protect you, but silenced you. You might think this was just another scandal in a long line of misconduct. But to the people of Charleston, it was the first time justice didn't turn away. CBS called the trial a small but real constitutional earthquake. The Atlantic published a full editorial titled, "Judge Aniston and the Moment America Faces Its System." And you know what? When Jennifer walked out of the courtroom that day, she didn't walk alone. Hundreds of people stood outside, applauding, not for victory, but for a beginning of looking straight into what had long been obscured by badges, seats of power, and lines of praise. Charleston was no longer a city asleep in its past. Today, it was a city willing to face itself. And Jennifer, not just the first to stand, was the one who opened the door so others could step out of the darkness. 2 months after the historic trial, Charleston was no longer the same city. The once silent hallways of the justice system were now bustling with the footsteps of federal inspectors, special investigators, and volunteers meticulously reviewing case files line by line. Across the Ravenel Bridge spanning the Cooper River, in a modest home on the outskirts of Mount Pleasant, Jennifer Aniston walked into her house for the first time with empty hands. No briefcase, no files, no rush. Just a black woman in her 60s, who had once carried an entire system on her shoulders, now finally allowed to breathe. Her 8-year-old nephew dashed out the door, wrapping his arms around her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. He looked up, eyes shining with pride. "Auntie, you made them listen, didn't you?" Jennifer bent down, placed a hand on the boy's messy hair, and smiled. Not a smile of triumph, but one of peace. "I made them look. Whether they listen is still their choice." In the following days, the media gradually pulled back, the crowds dispersed, and the city entered a period journalists called redefining justice. The South Carolina State Prosecutor's Office established a special commission with a $4.2 million budget dedicated to reviewing cases with signs of manipulation. From Washington, D.C., the Federal Department of Justice officially launched the Local Justice Reconstruction Initiative in 6 states, starting with Charleston as a pilot project. A nonprofit organization called the Aniston Foundation was founded by a group of young attorneys who had witnessed Beckham's trial. Their mission: to train community lawyers for low-income individuals, provide free legal support in cases of abuse of power, and offer ethics workshops for public officials. No bronze statue was erected, no square was renamed, but something greater happened. Behavior began to change. For the first time in decades, people who had once been wrongfully arrested, dismissed from courtrooms, were invited back to testify for justice itself. A mother who lost her son in 2016 was asked to read the closing statement of a retrial. A man who had been wrongly imprisoned for 11 months received a handwritten letter of apology from the city courthouse, signed by 3 senior officials. Jennifer did not return to the bench. She declined all nominations to the federal council and rejected offers to write a memoir, even as publishers promised millions. She told the sole reporter during one final brief interview, "I don't want my story to end in a book. I want it to begin with change. Every morning she walked along Wingo Way, past Waterfront Park. No more whispers, no more anonymous letters. Only everyday citizens stopping to greet her, placing a hand over their heart and saying, "Thank you." And in new courtrooms, people began to see young judges, brown-skinned, black, Asian, not trembling in the face of authority. The light didn't burst like fireworks. It crept in like morning mist, slowly but unstoppable. It seeped into every courthouse corner, every case file, every heart that had once been left behind. And if you ask, does this story have an ending? The answer is no. It begins from what seemed like a meaningless slap, from a woman who was knocked down, from a trial that forced a nation to reflect on itself, because justice doesn't lie at the end of the road. It lies in every step you choose to take against fear. And Jennifer Aniston didn't just walk it, she cleared the path. Something has finally begun to change. Join us in sharing meaningful stories by hitting like and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you can start each day with deep lessons and heartfelt empathy.